Right, good morning and welcome. Welcome. I think, as I said in my notes, and I think it's worth saying this again, this is a day to switch off the emails, enjoy fascinating science and talk to old friends. So I'm really looking forward to today at all of those levels. The theme, as I'm sure you'll know, is that it's the past, present and future of neuroscience. And this is echoing the longevity of the BNA, or as the BRA as it was before. So I am John Aggleton, I'm the current president of the BNA, and we are celebrating 50 years. 50 years in which the BNA actually wasn't officially formed until 1968, so we've been a bit premature in that. And there's a slightly sort of interesting start to the BNA, how it began, and we'll hear a little bit about that in just a few minutes. And then we have a succession of talks about diverse aspects of neuroscience, and some of them, as you'll rapidly realise, are not the typical subject matter, which makes them all the more fascinating and interesting, and we're going to have a wonderful day. The fact that it is 47 years of the BNA prompts me to ask or do the following thing just to get you all warmed up. So if everybody would like to stick their hands up in the air, everybody, sorry about this, everybody stick their hands. Right, now if you are not a member of the BNA, you can drop your hand down, and the person next to you with their hands up can look at you intently and stare at you and say, why aren't you a member of the BNA? So Louise and Anne will make sure that you become members of the BNA by the end of today. That's the first thing. Secondly, those with their hands up, keep your hands up. All right, I'm now going to do a raising count for how many years you've been members of the BNA, okay? All right, keep your hands up. Right, 2 years, keep your hands up. 3 years, keep your hands up. 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9, 10, this is getting interesting now, 11, 12, 13, no, there's more to come, 14, 15, 16, down to a handful now. And you can't be a member of 16 years, you're not old enough to be a member, ridiculous. 17, 18, 19, this is amazing, 20, at last, keep going, 21, 22, 23, Duncan is getting really, no one's going to beat me, 24, 25, but 25, is Yolanta here? Yolanta here somewhere? No? Yes? Someone is supposed to be in for 25 consecutive Christmas, but they're not here yet. I'm sure they're trying to win. 26, 27, 28, so we've now got a few people left who are clearly so old their memories has deserted them, because I'm sure they're members for that long. 27, 28, 29, 30, well, I think we stop at that point. I mean, I think there are a few moments. Right, now let's get started. Several things to say before we begin. One is there is this amazing programme which has been put together by a number of people, but Alan Palmer has done a huge amount of work, and I'll come back to that later today. One of the things the programme has, it contains, are detailed information about all the speakers. So they're not going to get full biographies, it's going to be fairly brief and straight into what they do, because all the information you could want is there. Now, I'm going to try and keep this to schedule, because I'm starting late already. And to do that, I'm going to, if a speaker looks like they're going to overrun, I'm going to don my reindeer horns of death. And when I put these on, the speaker knows that they better stop speaking because time is running out, okay? Here we go. Right. Now then, the inspiration for today's theme actually comes from a famous story. And it's about an elderly man with no known medical problems who has a sudden change in mental status characterised by confusion and vivid hallucinations involving friends and relatives, which leaves him in a state of trembling mania and uncharacteristic euphoria. It sounds a bit like a story by Oliver Sacks, but of course it's not. It's A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And the rest of today is a bit like a 9 lessons in carols, as you'll discover, except the lessons all come from A Christmas Carol. So you'll discover as the day unfolds that Charles Dickens was amazingly prescient about neuroscience and has something to say about every single talk that we're about to hear. So, the first talk, which is about the history of the BNA, I'm going to cheat here and simply say, and I didn't apologise that I didn't fit okay with him, but I'm described this as the ghost of Christmas Past. It's a bit cheeky, I know. Now, it was going to be Stephen Rose talking about the origins of the BNA, but alas, Stephen cannot make it. He's still recovering from illness, but we're delighted to say that John Lagnado is able to come here and speak. He's the archivist of the Biochemical Society since 2000, emeritus professor of Royal Holloway, and in 1958 he worked at Whitchurch Hospital, which is about 100 yards away from where I live in Cardiff, which is, to me, extraordinary. Anyway, John, would you like to start the proceedings?
Thank you very much. I was very sad when Stephen told me a couple of weeks ago that he might be unable to deliver the introductory talk today because of an impending knee operation. Well, he's had the knee operation, but he asked me then if I would be able to stand in for him, so to speak. I was very honoured, of course, and a little nervous, but somewhat brashly, I accepted. Well, the good news is that Stephen is recovering well, but slowly. The less good news is that instead of having one of your favorite eminence grise in front of you today, you have only a plain grey one. Now, the main justification for my being here at all is that I was in 1965 one of the so-called founding members of the London Black Horse Group, the informal precursor of the Brain Research Association. The others were the late John Dobbing, Robert Balash, and of course Stephen, who is the inspiration and driving force behind the Black Horse Group. I think it would be fair to note that bringing together scientists who shared similar interest in brain research was an idea floating in the air at the time, both here and abroad. Arguably, neuroscience as a discipline first saw the light of day in 1962 under the name of Neuroscience Research Program, when it was founded by the American biophysicist Francis Schmidt. The NRP preceded the formation of the American Society for Neuroscience in 1968. Now, I know that Stephen was very much inspired by his participation in 1965 in the wholly innovative NRP workshops which took place in Boulder, Colorado. And I myself very well remember the excitement of reading the small white NRP bulletins that emerged from these workshops. They covered topics which ranged from the fine structure of the synapse to behavior, and even, as I recall, some bizarre discussion of memory transfer experiments that were initially conducted on regenerating flatworms. I'll come back to those later. Indeed, it was these NRP bulletins, together with a huge tome entitled Neuroscience Study Program, Second Study Program, edited by Francis Schmidt, and of course the lively discussions at the Black Horse Pub, which later inspired me in 1972 to launch an intercollegiate MSc course in neurobiology at Bedford College, the first of its kind, I'm told. What I'll try to do now is to give you a brief account of the beginnings of the BNA. To quote your previous president, the consensus is that the BNA actually started life in 1965 as an informal brain discussion group, soon to be known as the London Black Horse Group. And that is the story I'll now focus on. I largely based what I say on a few published accounts, for example, the brief history of the BNA by Herman Batzelard, an early member of this group, which appeared in your bulletin in 2004, and by some more recent historical accounts and detailed ones, in particular those published by Joël Abi-Rached in 2012 and 13. And I'm particularly indebted to Stephen Rose for giving me, to use as I wished, the brief notes he had prepared for this talk, which he so aptly entitled BNA Thoughts. In fact, I can't think of a better way to start than by just reading to you some of the first items from these notes. May I have the first slide, please? As he put it, just made a count and found more than 50 different neuro prefixes, from neuroaesthetics to neuro-war. And he goes on, it's hard to imagine now, but the birth of the BNA was contemporaneous with the concept of neuro in the mid-60s, and they've grown up together. Then, as he goes on to put it, before that time, neuros were in different silos. Neurophysiology at the top, neurochemical, smelly stuff, and molecular neuro didn't even exist. Well, the founding members of the Black Horse Group mainly viewed themselves, in fact, in terms of their primary disciplines as neurochemists, neurophysiologists, neuropharmacologists, etc. At this point, I'd like to mention the key role played by Pat Wall, a neurophysiologist distinguished for his work on pain and many other things too. Pat had just come back from the States with a small grant from an American foundation specifically to enhance neuroscience in Britain. And as the London BHG was self-funded, this money was used to establish a more or less formal structure. And along with Pat came what Stephen refers to as Pat's gopher, one John Keefe. Heard about him? Then there was the energetic Chris Evans, who toured around the country trying to establish clones modeled on the London group. And these and others all helped to ensure the very informal and open-ended nature of our meetings. No minutes were taken. And there were only 3 rules. 1, avoid technical jargon so as to overcome disciplinary divides. 2, no professors, no heads of departments, so that we wouldn't feel too inhibited. And last but not least, near access, ready access to beer to lubricate our proceedings, and hence the Black Horse Pub as our venue. The topics discussed at the early meetings range from vision, the synapse, sleep, and pain, and many others. Now, as I mentioned, the London groups spawned various regional equivalents, informal equivalents of our brain discussion group, and we became a national society, so to speak, though still a very informal one. But that was all soon to change. What happened next is a bit contentious, but I'll stick to the consensus opinion I referred to before, that the Brain Research Association, BRA, could be seen as a more formal prolongation of the London Black Horse Group. At that time, the UK representative of the International Brain Research Organization, Derek Richter, at that time, the UK representative of IBRO, Derek Richter. It was with his prodding that the Black Horse Group morphed into a former national society, the Brain Research Association, or BRA. It was now acquiring a proper constitution and an elected national committee. National committee, all male, of course. That was, after all, the 1960s. But that prompted some young feminists to write a spoof in the New Scientist magazine, proposing a rival outfit to the BRA, with the acronym jockstrap. Well, key members of the Black Horse Group were elected to the first BRA committee, Pat Wall as chairman, John Dobbing treasurer, and Chris Evans as secretary. And I believe the reason Stephen Rose didn't stand for nomination at that time was because he and his wife were then busily engaged in creating another lively group, the so-called BSSRS, British Society for Social Responsibility in Science, which, by the way, also met at the famous Black Horse pub. But the birth of the BRA was not entirely painless. Some of you here, I'm sure, like myself, may well recall the lively and rather contentious meeting at UCL in 1967 that preceded the establishment of this new organization. And then, some 30 years on, in 1997, I believe, the BRA became the BNA, and the rest, as they say, is history. But I'm not quite finished. A few more words. Though there was much excitement and enthusiasm surrounding the first years of the BNA, who would have dreamt at the time that bona fide neuroscientists would one day seriously engage with concepts like memory, like consciousness? And yet, I can still recall how many of us were originally attracted to become brain scientists, because lurking somewhere in our psyche were the words like memory and consciousness, about which we were so very curious. And that at a time when these topics were not deemed as suitable or even ready for investigation, not science as the art of the soluble, by folk who broadly referred to themselves as molecular life scientists, or some similar name. That did not, of course, wholly prevent several brave attempts already in the 60s and 70s to think about memory, or even consciousness in biochemical or physiological terms, or indeed in mathematical and physical terms. I think Steve, as well as several other people in the audience today, were amongst the first to try climbing these perilous mountains. And I well remember, too, a remarkable mathematician cum theoretical chemist, John Griffith, who initiated some intriguing insights in what became known decades later as the hard problem. John was a colleague of mine whom I first got to know at my college, Bedford College, in 1966, when he presented his inaugural lecture entitled The Neural Basis of Conscious Decision. And that was well before such luminaries as Crick and Changeux began to probe possible routes into memory and consciousness in the 1970s. But there were also some much cruder and bizarre, some would say simple-minded attempts by biochemists to demonstrate the transfer of memory in all kinds of experimental protocols. For example, some of you may still remember protocols involving cannibalism amongst flatworms called planarians. Well, you may not remember, but I conducted this very similar type of memory transfer experiment on myself at the time, using monkey brains. Monkey brain extracts, I should say. I described these experiments at the end of my talk to the Postgraduate Psychology Society at UCL in 1967. If you just put up the next slide, please. Where I've been invited to speak about biochemical aspects of memory. It was rather enthusiastic. And at the end of my talk, well, here we are, that's the experiment. The end of the experiment is here. It's a very short experiment. At the end of my talk, I was asked two questions by the postgraduates. One, Dr. Lagnado, can you tell us what controls you used in these experiments? Bit of silence. Second question popped in from the audience. Have you tried replicating these results? Well, it only took a few seconds for us to burst into laughter and to twig what was going on. Thank you very much for your attention.